Everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to try a new format and do a chatty get ready with me, but on a topic other than makeup. So I was inspired by Charlotte Holdcroft's recent videos. She's done some where she's talked about documentaries, TV shows, news events. And so I thought it would be fun to do something similar, but it's taken me a while to find something that is a topic that I'm really excited about sharing with folks and can talk about on length. But I have recently been absolutely obsessed with this new Netflix adult animation series called Blue Eye Samurai. So this show is very different from what I normally like, but I think it has a very wide appeal, and I haven't liked a show this much since I was a teenager. So, this has really been like a very, very long time since I felt this way about any sort of TV show. And so I thought this would be a really fun topic to discuss with you guys. I'll be creating a look today inspired by one of the makeup looks in the series and talking through the plot, my reactions and thoughts about it. And so if you guys are interested in learning more, then just stick around. So first off, this video is definitely going to contain spoilers because the plot is very twisty, and so I really can't talk at length about it without giving a lot of stuff away. But without revealing anything about the plot, just to give you guys a basic sense of the nature of the show and who it might appeal to, I would say this is a really great show if you like really strong, badass female characters, if you like the action genre, if you like historical dramas, especially those set in Edo, Japan during the samurai era, if you like animation that's really beautiful, especially if you like the aesthetic of Japanese ukiyo-e paintings, that's basically how this entire series looks. And if you like dramas that deal with themes of racism, gender discrimination, class dynamics, those sorts of topics. Now, this is an adult animation series, meaning that it does contain very adult-oriented themes. There is blood and gore and nudity, so I wouldn't recommend watching this with small children. I think overall the rating is like at least 16 and up, if not 18 and up. But that said, if you're someone who doesn't normally like cartoons because you find them too childish, then I think this show will really appeal to you because it's definitely very cinematic in nature. It was written by the husband and wife team Michael Green and Amber Noizumi, and Michael Green was one of the writers for Logan and Blade Runner 2049, and so the writing style is definitely a little bit more prestige superhero film rather than your typical animation series. So hopefully that gives you a very spoiler-free sense of the basic contours of this series. But now let's actually get into talking about the plot and my thoughts on it. So today's makeup look is going to be inspired by this image. This is from episode 5, which I seriously think is one of the best TV episodes I have ever seen. It is a true masterpiece. Just the level of artistry, intricacy, and emotional depth that it adds to the series is really, really incredible. And so I absolutely love this episode. And this look features the main character, Mizu, and it's her bridal look. And so I'm going to try to recreate it as much as possible, but with the change that I'm going to use blue eyeshadow on my eyes because the dominant physical characteristic of Mizu, as also implied by the title of the series, is her blue eyes. And so obviously I don't have blue eyes. I guess theoretically I could get blue contacts, but I thought it would be more fun and more of like an interpretation to do blue eyeshadow instead to kind of evoke that effect. So with that, no more talking about makeup, but let's just get into today's look and talk about the plot of this series. So the overall plot of Blue Eye Samurai is that we have our protagonist, Mizu, who is a master swordsman. So she's basically the best swordsman in Japan, but she faces many struggles due to her identity. So both as a woman who basically has to disguise her identity in order to live out her life more freely, and also as a person of mixed race. So this series is set in the early to mid 1600s in Japan. So this is during the beginning of what is called the Sakoku period, which literally means locked country. And it was basically the beginning of the Edo period when the shogun first came to power after the Civil War. And he imposed a lot of new policies in Japan that were meant to maintain social order. One of these was really strongly restricting foreign trade. In the real world, there still was some foreign trade, but in this Blue Eye Samurai world, basically trade is completely restricted and all foreigners are basically banished from the country, and people are not really allowed to go in and out of the country. Now, there is an exception because the shogun was greedy and he allowed for 4 white men to stay in the country around the time of our protagonist's birth. So Mizu is half white, that's why she has blue eyes, and she faces immense discrimination as a result of this characteristic. So because Japan is so closed off at the time, any sort of Western characteristics like blue eyes are considered to be demonic, and she is frequently referred to by others as a monster, a demon, or an onryo, which is a type of demonic, hateful, vengeful spirit. And so she suffers a lot as a result of her identity. Her understanding of her backstory is basically that her father is one of these 4 white men that were in Japan at the time of her conception. They impregnated her mother and basically left them to die, and in fact are also actively trying to kill her as well by sending soldiers to hunt her down. As a result, she is forced to live as a boy to make it harder for them to track her down, and also in order for her to go on a revenge quest. So essentially, because Mizu sort of feels like she has nothing to lose when she's a kid, she thinks that her mom perishes in a fire, and so she promises to avenge herself and her mother by killing all 4 of these white men that were in Japan at the time, because she basically blames them for creating her as this monster and condemning her to a life of perpetual suffering where she cannot ever find love or belonging. So that's the basic contour of the revenge plot of the series. And in general, the series is sort of like Mulan meets Kill Bill meets Game of Thrones, that sort of style. So when we're introduced to Mizu, she's basically on this quest by herself, trying to gain information about these 4 white men. And the way she's going about this is she knows that there's certain industries that they are conducting their illegal trade in. In particular, the gun industry, the opium industry, and the prostitution industry. And so she tracks down a man named Hachi who has a European gun. And after taking him down in the first episode, she learns that he bought the gun from a man named Heiji Shindo, which she eventually connects with season 1 arch nemesis Abijah Fowler, who is one of these 4 white men that she has vowed to take down. Her revenge plot, though, is not at all linear in that she does encounter additional characters and conflicts along the way. So in the first episode, she meets Ringo, who basically becomes her sidekick, despite the fact that she tries her best in the first couple episodes to push him away. He is the son of a noodle maker and restaurant owner, and so he's perfected the craft of making soba noodles, despite the fact that he was born without hands. And so when he first sees Mizu in episode 1 and sees her beat up Hachi, who is this feared flesh trader, he is immediately inspired, and he tells her that he wants to become her apprentice because like him, she is deformed in that she has these blue eyes, but she is also super strong. So that's a very interesting moment because we see how the rest of the world in Edo, Japan at the time views Mizu, which is that even though she's this incredibly badass warrior, she's viewed as sort of being disabled or deformed because of her mixed race identity. Ringo also provides really great lighthearted banter and humor throughout the series, which is overall quite dark. And so Ringo is a really wonderful breath of fresh air, and pretty much all of his lines make me laugh because he has this very childlike demeanor, and he also really brings out Mizu's humanity. She's someone who has been so hardened by her entire life being motivated by revenge, being hated by other people. And here's this guy who kind of doesn't treat her like she's lesser than just because she's a woman or just because she's mixed race, but instead aspires to be more like her, at least insofar as she's super strong. Other characters we're introduced to along the way include Akemi, who is kind of like a foil for Mizu. So Akemi is basically a very high-born, noble lady. So she is the daughter of a prominent lord who basically rose from nothing. His father was a pig farmer, but he proved himself in the war and is now a prominent noble. She was basically born in the lap of luxury, but despite her privilege, has very little control over her life, because at the time in Edo, Japan, women are basically regarded as property of their male relatives. And so her role in life is exclusively to have a marriage that can benefit her family. And so we meet her in the first episode, and basically she's trying to convince her father to allow her to marry her secret lover, Taigen, who is an up-and-coming samurai. Similar to Kemi's father, he kind of rose from nothing. He was the son of a poor fisherman, but through his combat skills and bravery, he has become this undefeated samurai and one of the best swordsmen in his prominent school. And so initially, Akemi's father agrees to this match. And so Akemi and her secret lover, Taigen, are very excited and celebratory about this. Akemi sort of finally feels like she is going to be able to have control over her life because she's going to marry this guy she loves anyway, and he is kind to her. But then all of this changes as Mizu is continuing her quest. So as I mentioned earlier, she learns this name, Heiji Shindo, who's this illegal gun smuggler. And so she decides to go to Kyoto to the Shindo dojo. So that is basically a sword school that is owned by Heiji Shindo's brother. And so she's going to go there, and her goal basically is to talk to his brother and find out where Heiji Shindo is, so she can track him down and in turn track down the white man that he is hiding. So she goes to this dojo, which happens to be Taigen's dojo as well. And this is where we really see Mizu's fighting prowess, as she basically takes down everyone in the dojo with very, very minimal effort, because they refuse to let her see the master initially, and she's driven, and they try to kick her out of the dojo, and so she instead basically beats them all up. And in the course of this, they bring out Taigen because he's the best student in the dojo, and she handily defeats him, and in doing so takes his honor. And so that in turn ruins his engagement with Akemi, because he's now no longer this undefeated swordsman. And so Taigen decides he's going to go after Mizu and try to restore his honor by defeating her in a duel. Now, please note, nobody other than Ringo knows that Mizu is a woman, so everyone just assumes that she's a man. So the plot primarily revolves around these three characters, Mizu being the main protagonist, but then we also have Taigen, this guy who is on the one hand basically her enemy. So we find out later on that he was her childhood bully and almost killed her as a young child. He was also super racist to her. So he was not a good kid, but he has grown into being a more honorable man. And despite the fact that his goal ostensibly is to kill her in a duel in order to restore his honor, over time they end up developing a much closer, more intimate relationship, with him sort of begrudgingly respecting her because she is so good at her craft. And then we have Akemi, who is this more classical female character, but she is also badass in her own right. She is extremely cunning and intelligent and driven in an era where women really are not allowed to be. She is fighting to carve her own path. She might not have the swordsmanship skills as Mizu, but she definitely has her own talents that she utilizes to get her way. So I'm not going to summarize the entire plot because I actually hope you guys will watch it, and also because I think if I summarize the entire plot, this is going to be way too long of a video. But to kind of get into what I really loved about this series, so let me first just level set in terms of telling you guys, what I typically go for and like. So I was actually really surprised that I enjoyed this show so much because, for context, I'm usually not someone who likes action. I definitely don't like gory action scenes typically. I'm the kind of person who is normally looking away whenever I see those scenes in movies. And in general, I'm just like not super into, long action-packed sequences. I find them kind of stressful and not that enjoyable. But one thing that really shocked me early on with Blue Eye Samurai is just how beautiful all these scenes were. And again, I'm someone who would never typically characterize an action scene, especially one where there's blood and gore, as being beautiful. But the choreography in this series is just so incredible. It's really artistic in terms of how they did it. And because this is animation, it's easy to often think, okay, well, it's like, this is like very cool, but also very unrealistic. But what I thought was really interesting is they actually used real life stunt actors and filmed all of the sequences live action, and then they converted it into animation. So if you watch some of the behind the scenes footage, there are real people who are able to do all of these movements. And so that was really cool to me as well, because there's this level of realism that's there, despite the fact that, of course, this is a work of fiction and they do take their liberties. In addition, I did not think I would like this because I'm usually not someone who's a huge fan of revenge plots. It just doesn't really resonate with me a lot on a personal level. And also, most revenge plots I feel like follow a relatively simple arc. Basically, all the people or the main person that the main character cares about gets killed by somebody or some people, and then that's the motivation for revenge. And initially I thought that this would be similar with Blue Eye Samurai because revenge is such a major aspect of the plot. But upon watching it, I realized it's so much more nuanced than that. Essentially, what's so unique about Mizu's plotline is that it's not like she's actually out there to avenge them killing her mother. That's something we're kind of led to believe initially, but then we find out later on that that's not the case. Instead, her revenge is very nuanced and also very heartbreaking. Her motivation is ultimately that she's trying to avenge herself. She feels like she has been wronged because these people, these white men in Japan at the time, one of them created her as a monster, and not just her, but other half children as well. And that's really heartbreaking because it makes her revenge ultimately rooted in this sense of self-loathing due to internalized racism, which is on the one hand understandable because Mizu basically grows up never meeting anybody who is of white ancestry at all. And essentially when we see the flashbacks to her youth, she's consistently always told by people that her ancestry is shameful, that she herself is a demon or a devil because of it. And I find this very unique, and it makes Mizu a particularly tragic character because ultimately her revenge is sort of wrong-headed in that killing these men is not really going to have any sort of benefit directly to her or anyone else. But simultaneously, it makes her character remarkably relatable. I think that the feelings she has are really resonant for anyone who has felt like an outsider who has felt like people have unfairly judged them or characterized them due to factors outside of their control. And in particular, what I found really influential in this regard was actually episode 5, the episode that this look is inspired by. In that episode, we learn a lot about Mizu's backstory. Basically, we learn that she actually did not always live on the path of revenge. Instead, she actually, for a period, rediscovered who she thought was her mother, basically the woman who raised her. We learned later on that this woman actually was a maid that was paid to keep her in hiding. But in any case, she rediscovers this woman and she kind of leaves the path of revenge, because up until that point, her path of revenge is motivated by wanting to avenge her mother, who turns out not to be dead. And her mother arranges for her a marriage to this disgraced samurai who lives on this horse farm far away so people will not see her and see her blue eyes. And so it's a major change in lifestyle in that she goes from being this wandering swordsman who is on the path for revenge to instead being this submissive wife to this disgraced samurai. And initially, their relationship is quite cold. He sort of doesn't really give her the time of day. But eventually, they actually develop a really sweet relationship, and it seems like he's basically the first man who can really accept her for who she is. And for the first time ever, she's actually happy because she's gained this sense of love and belonging. Now, sadly, of course, this doesn't last forever. Once she shows him the true depths of her skill level as a swordsman and basically shows him that she is not actually the sweet, submissive wife that he thought he had, he basically turns against her and turns her into the authorities, where there's a bounty on her head and soldiers come to kill her. And so this episode is overall extremely, extremely heartbreaking, because you see that Mizu did try this alternative path that was unrelated to revenge, where she suppressed many aspects of herself, like her sword talents, her personality, in order to live as a woman, to fit societal expectations, and to try to finally gain love and acceptance. But sadly for her, that was not enough, and her own husband, who she loves, has betrayed her and basically sentenced her to death. Now, there is some ambiguity in the episode that fans tend to latch onto in terms of whether he sold her out or whether her maid/mother did, but the fact still stands that he basically lets the authorities come and try to kill her. Luckily, she is a master swordsman and is able to handily defeat them, but this is basically what puts her back on her path for revenge, because she learns that all of this love and happiness that she had was a mirage, and ultimately people are always going to regard her as a monster. And so I found that episode really powerful because it really illustrated how, even though Mizu is on this pathway for revenge, really her ultimate struggle is actually for love and acceptance and belonging in a society where she's facing near insurmountable barriers in terms of the level of discrimination that she is encountering. And as someone who is growing up without anyone who's like her, instead of kind of recognizing that this is unjust discrimination and trying to push against that, Mizu just fully internalizes what people think about her. She accepts that she herself must be a monster because that's what everyone says about her. And I find this simultaneously to be extremely heartbreaking, but also what makes this character really compelling and relatable. If she was just someone on a revenge quest that we could all kind of get behind and then she got her revenge, then that would be sort of one-dimensional. But instead, she's someone who is on this sort of not super well-motivated quest in a way, because it's ultimately more a quest motivated by the problematic structures and societal discrimination at the time. But nonetheless, you can't help but fall in love with and root for Mizu, even if her quest is very destructive both for herself and other people, because she's portrayed as such a flawed but inherently human character, and also because despite the fact that she claims all she cares about is revenge, as the series progresses, we see her really doing remarkable acts of heroism that show that she does on some level care about other people and want to help them as well. So this lip part I think is going to be the hardest part of this look for me, since this is very different from what I normally do, so I'm not going to talk through this part. Oh man, this lip look is quite difficult. Alright, so I know this mouth part looks really bad. It's not at all capturing that cute little like tiny rosebud lip thing that was popular at the time, but yeah, this is unfortunately the best I can do. If you guys have tips on how to get that really nice, cute shape, let me know. I don't think it's a look I'm going to do a lot, but yeah, this is where we're at the moment. So the other thing that I really loved and appreciated about the show was how it handled representation. So this is something that usually turns me off from sort of the action superhero genre, and that I feel like even when they've tried to make female superheroes, they usually do a really poor job of representing them in a way that's really relatable and realistic. I think oftentimes they go one of two ways. So either basically you have a female superhero that's written such that the character could basically be a man and there wouldn't really be any changes at all in the plot or characterization, or they try to make it sort of like the female superhero has to be kind of like perfect. You know, she has to just be good at everything because that way they won't get any criticism for how they portrayed this female superhero. Personally, I find both of these types of representation to be very limiting and ultimately not that helpful, because it kind of encourages folks to either feel like gender really doesn't matter at all within this. So if you have a superhero that just is nominally female, but more or less their characteristics are male, then you don't really portray any of the struggles that the character might encounter because they are female. Or if you portray them as being just this perfect human, it's really hard for folks to relate. And I think it's especially insidious because women already are told so many messages about how they should be perfect, you know, be doing everything, be beautiful, be strong, be caring, be moral, so on and so forth. And so what I think is really compelling about Blue Eye Samurai is here we have a very complex, very multi-layered female protagonist. She's like a superhero in that she is just so exceptionally good at fighting. It's really impressive how she's able to just take down all of these people in this semi-historical realism fantasy world that she lives in. But a lot of her experiences of being a woman are highly relatable, like when her husband disavows her because he realizes that she is a master swordsman, one that can handily defeat him. I think it's a very relatable thing that many women have experienced, where the moment they show their excellence, the moment they beat a man, any sort of romantic dynamic changes dramatically. Or when it's shown that she's afraid for people to find out that she's a woman because that would undermine her safety, and it's a lot easier for her to do solo traveling with people assuming that she's a man. So even though the overall setting is quite different from modern day, I feel like there's all of these elements that make it very resonant and feel very realistic to the experience of modern day women, and also people who might be of mixed race or who are people of color in terms of some of the struggles that they encounter. So here we have the finished look. What do you guys think? It's definitely a very graphic, almost kind of costumey look, I would say. But I'm glad it actually turned out pretty well. I think the blue really captures the blue of Mizu's eyes, which are very like bright and reminiscent of the sky or the sea. And the rest of the look is really supposed to be more of that Edo woman bridal kind of aesthetic. So this is definitely not an everyday look, but I think it does a really good job of capturing the vibe of the period and also some of the escapism of the show. So just to wrap up my thoughts on the show, I would say that I think it's a really incredibly unique show that just intersects at so many different angles, such that if you're someone who loves really strong characterization, like really deep characters that have gray moral lenses to them, that are evolving over time, if you're someone who really likes societal commentary and exploration of modern societal dynamics within the lens of historical realism, then I think this will really appeal to you. Or if you're just someone who loves beautiful scenery and animation and music, I think there's such artistry and attention to detail in every layer of this show. They did hire experts specifically in areas like calligraphy and Edo-Japan culture. So the creators did a lot of homework in creating the show, and that really stands out just in terms of the level of detail and attention that each aspect of this series has. So personally, I really think that Blue Eye Samurai is a masterpiece, by far the best adult animation I have ever seen in my life, and one of the best TV series I have ever seen in my life as well. So I do highly encourage y'all to check it out if you haven't already, and I would also love to hear your thoughts below. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!